Welcome to the Village Homeschoolers. I am Jen.
I'm Brittany, and today in the Village we're going to talk about homeschooling communities, what they are, what kinds are out there, and what you can do to make one yourself. Welcome to the Village. Let's talk about homeschooling communities. So I think, when you talk about homeschool communities, I think what we do, the homeschool group that we lead, is the traditional kind. It's what people think of when you say, oh, I'm in a homeschool co-op, right? But there's so many other options out there. For instance, like our group that we lead now, which we did not start, other leaders, wonderful people started, they started out differently. They were not a homeschool co-op.
In quotes.
Yeah, I'm quoting. Those of you who can't see me. Those weren't a homeschool co-op so much as they were kind of like a
play group almost.
Yeah. And they took turns kind of planning play dates or little outings. And that's what they kind of went and did. And that worked out really well for them. At that moment, they were doing that. They had younger ages. And that's really kind of one of the things you need to consider, right? Like, how old are your kids?
Yeah.
Are they going to be going to the fine arts museums that, are available in the metropolitan area you live in? Or are they just looking to play with their friends?
Yeah. And is a play group going to work for a bunch of 16-year-old kids?
Yeah.
Probably not.
Yeah. What your high schoolers are going to need something different than your kindergartners.
Yeah, exactly.
And so look at the ages of your kids and kind of when you start thinking about a homeschool community, a homeschool group, how are the ages of your children going to affect what you want that group to look like? So that's one of the things.
And we also have to consider a location.
Yeah, what's available in your area? Are you in an area that has a lot of indoor spaces that are available to small children, older children, that they can be explored? Are you in a more rural? I can't say that word.
Rural?
Rural. Rural.
Where, maybe your homeschool group looks more like we're doing hikes every week. Or is it more that we're doing fine art museums every week? It depends on where you're located, what works for your area.
Right. And also kind of what your community is seeking a little bit. I think the culture of where you live, for instance, if you're living in a more rural, it's amazing how many times you have to say that word when you can't say it. When you're living in a less populated area where you may have more expanses of land, maybe more farms, more of an agricultural presence, what's going to fit that group as opposed to somebody who may live in the middle of Chicago?
Yeah, because, an agricultural 4-H group that you are focusing on chicken keeping might not work for you if you live in Brooklyn, but it might work for you if you live in a more rural area.
Right. Unless, I don't know, maybe there's a Brooklyn chicken keeping group out there. I'm sure there is. If you're out there, please let us know because we'd like to talk to you.
Find us on Facebook.
Yeah. But generally, what's your area need? What, when you look at the ages, you look at the locations, what does your area need? What do the homeschoolers in your area need? And that's kind of where you can start when you start thinking about forming and finding a homeschool group. And then, as we said last week, Jen talked about Googling, I talked about Googling, and we found a homeschool co-op. And I think when you homeschool, you think about the traditional homeschool co-op as being some place that homeschooling families get together and have classes.
Yeah.
And that is normally run by the parents.
Mm-hmm. And taught and led by the parents as well, which is what ours is primarily done. But we're only one of many, many, many types of homeschool groups.
Right, yeah. And most of those co-ops kind of rent a space or they use a community space, community center, library rooms, churches, synagogues, those kinds of things. And they are just using those spaces to host classes that parents are teaching, mostly. And there's lots of ways that people do this a little bit. I actually, I don't want to harp too much on this because we are by no means experts, but, our group is specific for our area. It's locally run. It's just families that live in our area. But there are national models. Classical Conversations is a big one, where this is a curriculum that is nationally available, internationally available. It's available to anybody who wants to use it, homeschooling families, and they run co-ops based around this curriculum. And they kind of follow a pretty national model within their co-op groups. And that's really great. It meets a lot of families' needs, as opposed to what we do and what a lot of other groups do, which is just people in our area interested in joining kind of an enrichment experience. We do classes. They're just not your core reading,
we're not mostly doing math tests that are quizzed in, national standards or anything like that. It's more like it's really community building kind of stuff. And if we learn stuff, great.
Yeah. We do a lot of art. We do a lot of music, those kinds of things. We do some science, mostly because I feel like science is sometimes intimidating for homeschoolers.
Yeah, but there's dorky parents like myself and my husband that enjoy doing that kind of stuff.
Their family does the science teaching. I
likes to do poetry.
I'm the language arts person. Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, we do some of our core subjects, but I think we're more of an enrichment focused co-op, socializing, working on those fun art projects together. But there are also co-ops that they get together. They're kind of traditional, but they're also purely social based. I know of a co-op, not here, but not near us, but a co-op that does like a prom.
That's fun.
Yeah. Yeah, it's super fun. So there's like a prom, they do community service, they do overnight trips, camping, those kinds of things.
And this would kind of be what maybe like a play group would do. It would just be like more socializing, and I just want my kid to be around other kids, just a time to meet other people.
Yep. And then I know some groups also, and I feel like this might have become more prevalent with the pandemic and watching pods form, but they are like project-based groups. So like we are a group that really loves, we talked about chickens. Yeah. Chicken keeping. And we are focused around raising chickens.
And actually a lot of 4-H groups, homeschool groups are project-based. I mean, that's the whole thing. It's like you're supposed to be like kind of child-led learning. And so there is a lot of project-based groups going. So yeah, we've done things like robotics, or we've done where we're going to do a show at the end of the year or something along those lines. And the kids really dig that. But it's not as for us, we found it wasn't as well-rounded, and we didn't get everything that the kids wanted into that project. It's hard when you grow to do project-based. You end up doing a lot of projects.
Yeah, so. It worked really great for smaller groups, I think.
Yes.
And when we were a smaller group, it worked really well for us.
It did. It worked great for a time, yes.
And so, but that is an option. That is what a co-op can be project-based, and we can do, I mean...
Yeah, if you want to do a whole semester on chicken keeping, the kids would totally dig it.
Or space, or what else? I mean, we've said... There's so many cool groups out there that do so many cool things.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's like kind of what the traditional group co-op homeschool group looks like. Now, some of those homeschool groups that are traditional are religious in affiliation. In fact, if you look at kind of the history of homeschooling founders, if you will, were often religious groups. They were often religious families, and they were focusing their homeschooling because they wanted their children to have a faith-based experience and curriculum and education. And that is their right. And so, in a lot of ways, all homeschoolers, even those of homeschoolers who are not religious or homeschoolers who have come to homeschooling for different reasons, can be grateful for that, because we have homeschooling in this country today because of those first, groups of people who were at the time, the majority are religious. I think we were just reading that only about a third of homeschoolers identify as faith-based religious anymore, which is a huge change from where we started.
Yeah, especially even when I was a child. Like I didn't know, even with my son, I just assumed that almost everybody was religious, and I didn't know that there was, because you watch people on TV, like, I'm not going to name names, but you watch religious families on TV, huge families that go on national TV shows that homeschool, and they're all faith-based. So you don't realize that that's not the norm actually anymore, that everybody, it's
Right. So, and now these groups still exist. And I will preface this by saying people in religious groups, sometimes have a variety of different religious beliefs. There is variety. You're not all one faith. Sometimes there also are groups that are just one faith. There are also people who are in inclusive or secular groups who are religious people. They have just decided that a non-religious group is a better fit for them. So,
and we have a mixture in our own group?
Yes, we do too. We have people of all faiths, devout to atheist.
Yeah.
And we all are happy in our group together. So that's great. But we know that a lot of co-ops and the history of homeschool co-ops kind of started with faith-based groups, and those still exist today. Now, those are really great for a lot of people, especially if you perhaps go to church or temple together, because you're already kind of in a community.
Yeah.
So your kids are already somewhat affiliated with each other, that you have something in common, your faith, And you may even have a space because you have a place of worship that is often willing to give you, Sunday school rooms to use, or a community center room to use, or a auditorium to use. And so you can include religious education. You have resources available from your place of worship, perhaps. There's all these wonderful reasons this works for a lot of families who share the same religious beliefs. And a lot of times with the religious groups, you often see them ask for a faith-based statement. They'll ask for their members to sign a statement of faith. And that isn't something we do in our group, but a lot of groups find that is helpful for them to create a cohesive community around their faith. So that is something you'll see. And I think those groups still exist, though they may be less prevalent. I think they are still very common in the homeschooling community. And you'll see religious field trip groups. You'll see religious class, the traditional homeschool co-op groups, all those kinds of things. So that's one option. And if that's something that works for your family, that's something to really kind of look into. It's also something that if it doesn't exist in your faith-based community, that you might want to bring up to your place of worship, your church, your synagogue, those kinds of things, because they may be really interested in helping you get it started.
Yeah, and so another option too is like how I kind of got started was just play groups. I did a lot of library story time, and at first it was great because, when your kids are younger, they can hang out with anybody at story time, and a lot of times it's just preschool kids. And, there's always tons of space if you're just doing a play group. Hey, let's meet at a different playground every week. And it's great particularly when they're young. And, there's different levels of, comfort and influence there. Yeah. And then you can have different parents taking turns on who's going to pick to do what every week.
Right, or where you're going to go.
Yes, exactly. Transportation's easy. You can just there's a lot of adaptability there.
Yeah, it's a really good,
and it's also really cheap and inexpensive. Some of these religious groups, I was looking into other homeschool groups before I started just going in the play groups, and some of them are kind of really expensive, especially when you're already like new to this and you're like, oh, I kind of have to be a stay-at-home mom now, and I can't really maybe afford, $500 a month for classes. Yeah, going to the playgrounds really sounds great.
Yeah, right.
In comparison.
And a lot of the libraries, at least where we are, they're really open to homeschoolers. And this gets into, I think, probably some of the reason, and I have no idea. I'm not a librarian. I have no idea the minutia of the library system. But I know our library groups are really encouraging and welcoming homeschoolers. And they'll put through homeschooling programming. They will meet requests. My beloved librarian, who is probably not listening to this, but I love her. She will ask us what books, homeschoolers are interested in reading and what curriculums are suggesting and those kinds of things. They're really eager to kind of tap into the homeschooling community. And I think that's really important to kind of realize, because if your library doesn't reach out to homeschoolers, maybe you need to reach out to your library.
Because they might not know you exist.
Yeah. And I will just say this, and everybody that knows me knows this, libraries are my favorite place in the world. Librarians are my favorite people in the world. But, huge shout out to libraries, but they are often your biggest friend for homeschooling.
They're a great resource.
Yes. And they have grant funding. They have allotted funds from taxpayers in a lot of places if it's a public library, and they need to use those funds. That's what it's there for. And if there are not people using those funds, they're eager to create programming often for you to use those funds. The other thing I'll say is always tell your librarian you're a homeschooler, because a lot of times, at least where we are, librarians will waive your fines.
This is true. Yeah, if you are a teacher, which we are because we teach our children, even though we're not licensed teachers, we do not pay fines.
Yeah.
Which is nice.
And my town library, actually, they actually have a limit on how many books you can take out, because we're tiny. We live in a tiny town. And so, but if you're a teacher or a homeschooler, you get as many as you want.
Unlimited books.
Yeah, and we have a record, and I hold it. No. No. So anyway, there's totally, tap into your libraries. They are a really good way to start a play group even. We can't recommend them enough. And just a phone call will often let you know that, hey, they have programming available.
And they're free. I mean, you can't stress this enough. I mean, it's just such a great resource. And then they hold the books for you, so you don't have to fill your house with them.
Right.
Yeah.
We've also had librarians teach at our co-op.
This is true. Yeah. They've taught classes for us.
They've taught classes. Side note, we've also had a woman who was a bank employee teach a class for us too.
This is true. Yeah.
So you never know where you're going to find homeschool community because they are out there and they are willing to network. So yeah, libraries and parentheses, other community organizations. Yeah. Check with them.
All right. So yeah, and I'm going into clubs and groups. So we obviously started as a 4-H group, and many people think that is chickens and tractors, and that is not the case. It can be. It can be. And that's why I joined, because I was like, yeah, chickens and tractors. And I was kind of disappointed when there wasn't any chickens and tractors, but it ended up being great because we did a theater class. But yes, 4-H groups is a great resource, and our the extension center where we do 4-H groups out of, they're a great resource. They let us borrow all kinds of stuff, including iPads and robotics and Legos, crayons, whatever you could possibly need, they let us borrow for free. And so we teach classes based off of whatever we can get. So yeah,
whatever we can steal from them. No,
we borrow. We borrow. Of time.
We do borrow. And 4-H groups are great. And I think it's so funny to me sometimes that I ended up being in a homeschool co-op that is also a 4-H group, because when I was a child, I was actually in a homeschool co-op that was also a 4-H group because my mom heard the same thing in the words free, and homeschoolers, we love that word, right? Free. What? Oh, okay. We're in. We don't care what it is. Free curriculum and resources. And she signed me up for, and this is story time, a horticulture class and a public speaking class.
This is why you're so good at this.
Yeah, it was my homeschooling career. Homeschooling and public speaking. And we were off and we started a homeschool group. And I've actually never told Jen this. My mother named our homeschool group Inquiring Minds.
Brilliant.
How homeschooly is that? Right? I know. So yeah, it's not like this some new like earth shattering thing. I think 4-H and homeschoolers have been working together a long time because I'm not super young here. So it is totally, we love our 4-H groups and they're all over the country. I pre this podcast coming into conception, we were talking to somebody in Illinois who they were like, oh, we're a 4-H leader, but we're also a homeschoolers. And I was like, oh, cool. It's super fun. So we love 4-H. We also know of Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts.
Yep.
They're homeschoolers. They're just troops of homeschoolers.
Yeah. And they good resource as well.
Yeah.
Good way to interact with other kids and get resources.
Yeah, totally. And then now there are other groups that like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, like 4-H, that they may not be homeschool specific, but you may have homeschool specific chapters of.
There's lots of other organizations out there.
Right.
For instance, there's a chapter of the Gay Straight Alliance homeschool group.
There's one in our area. There's a Gay Straight Alliance homeschool group chapter. So there's like these national organizations that exist in public schools, private schools, just communities. And you can start a homeschool group / chapter of that group in your town.
Yeah. Anything you need. There is probably a resource for it.
Yeah. There's also other groups, and this one's more specific to homeschooling, but I'll just use it as an example. There's these groups called Wild and Free groups, and they're based off of the book, The Call of the Wild and Free, Reclaiming the Wonder in Your Child's Education. And that was written by Ainsley Arment. And the book I actually kind of remember when all of a sudden all my homeschooling friends were reading this book, and it was this really great book, and it's about child-led learning and nature and being out and wild and free, right? And groups started popping up all over the country. Homeschool groups, homeschool little co-ops, following this kind of educational philosophy, if you will. And it was, the author of the book and the method is she's a homeschooler. So homeschool communities really took to this, and it speaks to a lot of us. And I know there's a group close to us, I think, actually, that a friend of mine just went and met with. But yeah, so these groups are kind of popping up all over. And so if you're like nervous about starting from scratch, sometimes it's great to find these homeschool groups and just be like, hey, I read the book, or this really spoke to me. Is there a chapter? Is there a group in my area or close? If there's not, maybe you start it, because sometimes they can give you the resources or the assistance to do it if other groups have already done it in other places in the country. So that's something to think about too. Another thing now, this is not something that Jen and I are super familiar with other than chatting with others that have done it. But co-ops can actually be led and taught by people who are not parents.
Professionals. I'm too cheap to pay for that.
I think in the end of the day, the reason that, we don't is we do parent-led classes and co-ops is because it is more affordable for us. And that's a really important,
more inclusive, for our group personally.
Yeah, for our group, that works better. But there is a co-op 45 minutes from us, or there was pre-pandemic anyway. I don't know if they still exist. And they were entirely led, organized, run, and all the teachers were professionals and staff members that were not parents. And that was really great for some parents that did it because they were actually able to, and this is kind of a dirty word, but drop off their children.
Oh, scandalous.
I know. Homeschooler, we talk about co-ops and it's a cooperative. We all work together. But sometimes you need a break. And so if you can do that, and if that's something available to you, and you have teachers in your community who can teach music, art, dance.
No shame. Yeah, because the classes we teach are based off what our parents' talents are.
Right.
And sometimes we just don't have parents that, can speak German or,
we don't
play the harp.
Yeah.
It's just the reality of it sometimes.
I don't know. Sometimes these people surprise me in our group, though. If you're listening and you play the harp and you're gonna
we didn't know this
later.
about you.
Yeah, we didn't know. Anyway, but yes, no, it's true. So this is a really, really good way to outsource some things that you may not have available to you, and it's still going to be cheaper than a private tutor.
Yeah, correct.
If you're splitting because you're basically the group I know of that did this, they would split the price of the class based on how many children were signed up. So if there were 6 kids, it was a little more expensive. If there were 10, it became a little cheaper. And basically, you're splitting the price of a private lesson in a lot of instances, in that instance. And so it's easier, piano lessons, especially if you have more than one child, i.e. me, that's, you're taking out a car payment to do that sometimes.
Second mortgage just so my child can be taking Latin courses.
Yeah. So, if you can find it, it is more expensive than doing it yourself, but it is more affordable than just, putting your children in multiple lessons and
it's probably
lessons.
Done correctly. As opposed to me trying to wing the Japanese lessons for my son.
Well, Jen's never actually tried to teach Japanese. Have you?
Duolingo, does that count?
Oh, well, we're getting to that. Yeah. Well, yeah, this is true. What you'll eventually learn is that sometimes some of us, again, i.e. me, are overly confident in our ability to teach things that maybe we shouldn't. And this will take us back to the year of 2018 when me, the language arts person, when I taught astronomy for a year. And Jen was horrified.
Well, she did it through poetry.
There was 2 minutes of every day where we learned an astronomical poem. Jen didn't approve.
She did it lovely. It was lovely.
So, yes. So sometimes if you're I'd actually like a science teacher to teach my child astronomy instead of my friend who lives 10 minutes away from me and sometimes forgets to wear shoes.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to look for a co-op that is led and run and taught by outside people. And that's totally fine. What works for you. This is really cool too if you have older kids, because I'm going to be honest with you. When my child gets to the calculus level, I'm outsourcing that. I don't want to teach calculus.
Yeah.
I took calculus. Do I want to teach it? No, I don't remember a bit of it. And so I'm outsourcing that. Now that maybe I outsource it online or something like that, but maybe Jen and I are going to split calculus lessons for our kids.
Yeah, maybe.
To be fair, actually, though, your husband probably could teach calculus.
Yeah, my husband could teach calculus for sure.
I mean, the children might be bored out of their mind. No.
He's actually a great teacher.
Well,
I hate to say this about him.
He's a really good teacher, but calculus is so boring. Could he make it good?
No. There's no making calculus good.
I'm with you. This is why I don't want to teach it. Mm-hmm. So again, at some point, we may have to be outsourcing. We may be looking for a co-op that is willing to do some of that harder,
boring maths and sciences.
And all of you mathematicians, we appreciate you.
Yeah, you're needed in the community.
Because
we need one of you.
I will say this. If you are looking into starting a group, but you're like, gosh, I don't want to teach. I don't want to lead. I just want somebody else to handle it. I'm willing to pay a little bit more. A lot of times businesses in your community that serve children offer services to families of children. They are really not busy during the school day hours. So 8 to 4, no one's most public schoolers are not taking dance lessons from 8 to 4 o'clock. They're not taking pottery lessons.
Yeah.
So they're often willing to give you discounted rates if you're a homeschooler, and if you're willing to come and take your art lessons or your music lessons or your Latin lessons at 11 a.m. when homeschoolers can do that. So that is something to look into. If this all sounds super intimidating to you, starting from scratch, all that stuff, call your local businesses. See if they'll give you a homeschooler rate. I know that my children take music lessons, and we can afford music lessons because we get a homeschooler rate. Super grateful. We have an amazing music instructor. You guys did percussion.
Yes, my child has done drumming lessons, but we do a lot of stuff through Parks and Rec, through
That's
the community.
true. Yeah. If you are in now, I know this is
More kind of like community groups.
right. But yes, this is something, I'm glad you brought that up, Jen, because my actual tiny local town did a homeschool judo lesson through our Parks and Recreation Commission. And I think they did like 2-month sessions, and homeschoolers could take a judo lesson. I think they did it at like a 1 p.m. or something like that. And they did it because those judo instructors were teaching judo to nobody because kids are in school.
Yeah.
And so they were able to do homeschool lessons for an affordable rate in the middle of the day. And the town's Parks and Recreation Committee was able to hold that. You did drumming that way.
Yeah, we did drumming. It wasn't an actual homeschool group. It's just traditional drumming. And we didn't even do it through our town because our town's really small and they didn't offer as many things on the Park and Recreations page. But if you look locally, surrounding towns, particularly bigger towns, if you have towns with more than 20,000 people, you'll see that they have a lot of options for classes for instruments, swimming, karates, all kinds of stuff, theater groups, all kinds of things that your child might be interested in, and they have pretty good prices because it's paid by the taxpayers.
Yeah,
so it's
at least subsidized.
Yeah, subsidized. And sometimes you have to pay an extra rate if you're out of town, but it's totally worth it.
It's still way more affordable.
It's totally affordable.
And you're going to meet other homeschoolers there too. I know 2 towns above me, they did a swimming program exclusive for homeschoolers, and yeah, I walked into a Parks and Recreation class and met 2 other homeschoolers who were not in my co-op, and actually connected to another co-op. I don't belong to that co-op because we have a co-op we're running and it takes up a lot of our time. But like, we share resources with that co-op. They ask us questions. We ask them questions. We've gathered with them to do a field trip that was where they needed bigger numbers than like a public school numbers. And we were able to do it with them. So, I mean, you're going to meet homeschoolers in a lot of different places. And sometimes you can create those little homeschool communities in your town, in your Parks and Recreation, in your library.
Yeah. And that's actually like that being brought up, like library groups, they're a great resource too. And that's actually where I met our other leader. I didn't know anybody. And then I met our other lovely leader. We were doing the little play groups once a week in the library. It was mainly for preschoolers, but she was also homeschooling, and she also didn't know what the heck she was doing. So we kind of like bonded over that. And then, it's a great place it's a great way to meet people, and there's a lot of like, for us here, there's a large military community. So there's like military homeschool groups as well, doing Lego classes where we actually hired a teacher to teach like Lego engineering. So there's tons of resources out there. You just kind of have to ask, look around, talk to people. I know that's hard because I'm deeply introverted. So for me, it was really hard to kind of put myself out there. You can find other,
I just drag her around everywhere.
It's true. I just asked Brittany to do stuff. Please call.
The other thing is, if you are in a really, really remote community, town, area, you can look into online options. And we talked about last week that this just did not work for our group, but that was just our group. A lot of people are loving online communities. Outschool is like huge. Like, there's tons of homeschoolers taking Outschool classes, making friends that way.
Yeah, especially if you're still like, a lot of people are still really worried about COVID and everything like that. So if you're concerned about medical issues like that, online communities are also great for that.
Yeah, especially, and if like, even if it's COVID aside, you have a child who has some special needs or a child who is medically fragile and may be in and out of a hospital receiving treatments very frequently. It can be disruptive to your life, and you may not have the ability to be like, on Tuesdays and Fridays I get together with my homeschool co-op, because that your life is so it follows the pattern of your child's medical needs. Well, the online communities are great because your child can be in the hospital on their iPad chatting about, coding or chickens. We talk about chickens an insane amount.
We all have chickens.
Yeah. Well, okay. Jen and I have chickens. We were talking to another member of our co-op last week, and she was like, well, I just assumed because so many of you have chickens. And I was like, that's a stereotype, but it's a true one for us.
It's not a requirement for membership.
Yeah. Yeah. Lots of homeschoolers do not have chickens. But yes. So, yes. To get back on topic, those online forums can really work for you. And that may be a way, I know a few people who they communicate online with people and then make the drive once a month, maybe to hang out in person because that person lives 90 minutes away and they're willing to do that, once a month, but maybe not once a week or twice a week. And so that's an option too. We're not knocking those online communities because that is community building and that works for the people that belong to those communities.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And also field trip groups. So we kind of did this during COVID. We just kind of did once a week. We'd all kind of meet and do field trips. Mostly they were outdoors, but when we started back into classes again, we realized that some people just really like the field trips. Mm-hmm. And we decided that we were just going to maybe continue that, but just alternate with classes and field trips. And so we still kind of do that. But field trip groups are great because, we've been, there's sometimes you just want to do field trips and you don't want to do it alone because it's kind of lame or boring. Mm-hmm. Or you're like, hey, you want to take a trip with me. It's easier to carpool. So we'll go to maybe we want to go to Plymouth Plantation because it kind of goes into what we're studying right now in school. And so we do stuff like that, field trips. Right. So some people just do that. We like to do kind of like a hybrid of those kind of things.
Right. I know there's a couple groups, and I'm going to guess if this exists where we live, this exists everywhere, that are just like, hey, we're the Texas Homeschool field trip group. And they're like on social media, and they'll just post like, if 10 or more of us go to this zoo, the rate is $12 a person.
Yeah, big discount.
Yeah, whatever it is. And that's a really great way to meet people. You can have offshoot co-ops like, hey, our kids are the same age. We have the same interests. Maybe we do this.
And it's also really okay when you miss a day. Yeah. It's a lot less stress to show up every week. And because sometimes that just doesn't happen when you have.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Tons of kids.
I will say I have a couple friends that run field trip groups, some local, some in other places in the country, and they're amazing and we appreciate them. If you decide to join one of those, it's often a good idea. You don't have to do it frequently, but plan a field trip here and there. Help them out.
Yeah.
Because often in those groups, and this is for a whole other podcast, sometimes the workload falls naturally on just a few people. And if you're the one calling every zoo, museum, farm, artist in the area that you live, you're going to feel a little burnout. So if you join one of those groups, get your bearings, and then maybe plan a field trip group.
Field trip group.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a hot phrase you don't think you have to say often. Field trip group. Anyway, and we, like Jen said before, we did field trips. We've done just field trips, and we love field trips.
Yeah,
they're super fun. And so our group is kind of one of those hybrids now. We do traditional classes, and then we also do field trips.
And it's great because if sometimes field trips are duds. I planned one when we first started doing the field trip semester. I planned one and it was a complete and utter failure. I was like, why can't we go to the Glacier Park? Well, Glacier Park is great when it's not snowing and you have a bunch of toddlers jumping from rock to rock. It was terrible. I'm surprised anybody came back to our co-op.
Also, I will point out that we left that not only covered in snow, freezing, but the children's limbs were dyed blue. And that's
we were going to do this awesome activity as well as learning about glaciers, and it was such a bad idea.
Well, it wasn't a bad idea. The weather was bad, and as you can expect, not everyone was like up for 25 degrees in snow, and it was not a season where you should have gotten 25 degrees in snow. So we planned it thinking, well, it's spring, we'll be fine. We weren't, but because we were in charge, we were kind of, hell or high water. We're there.
And it was the first day. It was the first field trip. So it's like, okay, well, we have to go. There's new people coming, and I'm so happy.
All of them came back.
They came back. I didn't ruin it for it.
They were amazing. We love them. They're our friends, and we are super grateful they gave us a second chance. Yeah. So But I think that's the beauty of a field trip group, right? Because it is a little laid back and you're like, well, this was an absolute bomb.
Yeah.
We'll try it again next week.
With a totally different place. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a new, fresh slate all the time. So yeah, join those field trip groups. They're great. Start one if you don't have one.
Don't do Glacier Park in the middle of winter.
Yeah. And you can add field trips into any of the groups we talked about. 4-H, Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, homeschool co-op classes, religious groups, all those fun things. Now, I would be remiss, and the homeschoolers in my community they're going to be harassing me endlessly if I don't mention this. We do want to talk about, we live in one of the 50 states in this country and one of the many countries in this world. And the homeschool laws vary greatly in the United States, at least state to state. And they vary greatly all over the world. So in our state, our co-op is, we abide by state laws and regulations, which we are, we're very fortunate. We don't have a ton of those in the state that we live in. Some states are different. So make sure before you start to form a co-op or become very involved in one, affiliate your name with one, you understand what your state's laws and guidelines are for homeschool co-ops, and make sure that you're comfortable with how that co-op is being run or what the rules, the rules you're setting for your co-op as well. Make sure you're abiding by the state's rules because some states do have regulations for their homeschool co-ops. I have a friend who is an attorney and an educational attorney, and her general rule that she tells homeschoolers is if it looks like a private school and it acts like a private school, it's going to be regulated like a private school. And now that may not apply for everybody in this United States or in the world, but that definitely applies for us. And so we like to keep that in mind. For instance, depending on how you look at some of the educational laws in some states, if you meet more than once a week, you can be regulated as a private school. So those are just some things to think about when you're starting groups, thinking about the group you want to start, thinking about the ages you want to start with. And then, keep in mind, well, how do I manage the state's expectations with my group's expectations? Think about maintaining the privacy of the members of your group. Think about a community agreement, rules that you might have people agree to, signed agreements, all those kinds of things. Just something to think about. And we're going to talk more about that in the weeks to come because I think that's something everybody has to keep in mind. But just know that if it works for us or it works for somebody else, it may look a little different for you because we all live in different places. All right. So we have a few listener questions and we are fully ready to acknowledge that most of these come from our friends because we are new and they love us. Thanks, friends. So we had a lot of people asking how many families and kids are in a normal homeschool co-op.
So that just depends on how many people you can accept. So our group kind of started a little bit smaller, and we are growing, but we are kind of at the limits and we are bursting at the seams here. So yeah, it could be, just 10 families, or it could be up to 50, 60 families is what we're kind of approaching now.
Oh my gosh, are we?
Yeah, there's a lot of people on the waiting list.
Yeah, I think when last year I looked at the numbers and we were like, 82 kids?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, but we know groups bigger.
Yes.
We know groups smaller. There's really no set rule. It just it kind of depends on what you can accommodate.
Yeah. How many teachers do you have? How big's your space?
Yeah.
So for us, it's like the spacing and who can teach a class. And do you really want a class with 40 kids in it?
Right.
So for us, it's just an accommodation thing, what we can personally accommodate.
Right. We had somebody else ask, is it organized? Isn't it hard work? And is it cliquey?
It is organized, mostly.
Well, it can be. I guess that depends.
Yeah.
We are organized because
Brittany is organized.
Well, so are you.
Yeah.
I would say all of the leaders of our group are organized or need organization.
Yeah.
We're team organization, but you don't have to be. We just are for us. So it is organized for us. Is it cliquey?
It can be. I personally strive not to be cliquey.
Right.
I will talk to just about anything.
Anything. That plant over there.
The dog, whatever. Yeah, I mean, it can be because, a lot of these relationships started as, hey, I'm a part of this group already. Do you want to come join? So you already kind of have a friendship with people. And then you kind of tend to be with the people that are friends with your children as well. So, if Brittany's kids are close in age to my child, then obviously we're going to hang out more than somebody that has a bunch of toddlers.
Right. I mean, yeah, I think that's something that I think that's any group. I don't think that's specific to homeschool groups. But yeah. So yeah, I think that if you're not careful and you're not being intentional with your communication and your efforts with people in the community, yeah, it could be cliquey.
And I think all three of us as leaders put a lot of effort into making everybody feel accepted and as part of our group.
I'm sure we don't do a perfect job.
I do. I don't know about Brittany.
Yeah. Me on the other. No, yeah. I mean, I'm sure, and we have made multiple times where I'm like, oh man, I should not have said that. That was not what I meant. That kind of thing. So I mean, we're not perfect. We're human beings, but
we try to involve you. We really do.
Yeah, we believe homeschooling can be for everybody, and we want to support them. So that's our goal. Our goal is not to be like in the.
It's only the cool kids.
Yeah, we're not really cool kids.
Well, yeah. Once again, she's speaking for herself.
Jen is the coolest. Yeah. This is one. Do kids graduate with a degree from a homeschool co-op?
Well, this is based on your local laws, kids. So our particular one, no. But our state has very kind of laxed homeschool laws. So
which we love.
Yes.
Thank you, state. We don't want you to change those.
So technically, I could print out something and say yes, but no.
Right.
That's not really what our group is all about.
A lot of homeschool co-ops aren't accredited, and most of the time again, Jen's right. This totally does depend on the homeschool laws of the state you live in. But our state, you don't have to have your homeschool diploma doesn't have to come from somebody accredited. So my children get a diploma from me. That's their high school diploma. That counts. They don't need to get one from my co-op because there's no process of verifying anything in the state that I live in.
And once again, we're really looking for enrichment, us personally.
Right. So yeah, our kids aren't getting the reading, writing, and arithmetic in our co-op. That's not kind of what we do.
If they learn a little math, great. But that's not what we're going to co-op for. There are co-ops that have that. And you would have to look for that specifically. Right. And we get a lot of questions about that.
Yeah.
Because people are looking for that, particularly now with a lot of people homeschooling because of COVID and stuff like that. They're looking for a replacement for a regular public school. And you're just going to have to find a co-op that has that.
Yeah. And sometimes if you're looking for standardized testing or things like that, you'll have some groups that they do that. They do an SAT prep course, and then they'll do, they'll have kids sit for the SAT. They'll get a proctor. They'll do the whole thing. Some people just kind of pass that along. The public schools will allow the homeschoolers to take the standardized tests alongside the public schoolers. So it just kind of depends on what you're looking at and what you're looking for. I would wager that our homeschool group is probably in the majority and not issuing certifications, test scores, anything like that. But do they exist? Yes, just not with us and not anywhere in the state that I know of that we live in. Although the neighboring state to us, I think has some of those options. But that's just because the homeschool laws are very different there. All right, guys, that's it for this week. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. If you'd like to connect with us, ask questions, check in with us, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook, as well as at our email at thevillagehomeschoolers@gmail.com.
And next time, we're going to talk about tips for starting a co-op.
Yep, we got our top 10 tips.
Top 10. All right, thank you.
We'll see you then.
Bye.